Dames en heren, geachte vrienden en supporters van recht als cultuur. Ik ben blij jullie erbij te mogen voorstellen aan de spreker van deze avond, Laurent de Sutter. Laurent, het is een genoegen je bij ons te hebben vanavond. The problem is with him, as you know, il est difficile de s'adresser aux polyglottes comme Laurent de Sutter, car leur maîtrise de plusieurs langues nous met toujours dans l'embarras de ne pas être à la hauteur des compétences de langue, qui est en même temps une compétence culturelle pour toi et pour d'autres aussi. En Belgique, on fait partie du monde francophone et comme nous allons voir, notre vedette de la soirée, pour lequel, quand même, il y a des gens qui sont venus de Düsseldorf, non seulement de Düsseldorf, de la Scandinavie, de Finlande plutôt, et qui ont pris un taxi pour être à l'heure ici. Alors ça, c'est vraiment un cas modèle, et je vous salue de tout mon cœur d'être avec nous ce soir. Et j'en suis très très content. Alors, pour cette vedette qu'il est tout simplement, ce qui est vrai pour toi, en particulier comme éditeur éminent, il s'agit de la langue, du transfert de la langue et des langues. Mais on est aussi lié au monde flamand qui nous renvoie au problème éternel de la constitution d'une identité collective au sein de l'Europe, à savoir à Bruxelles. C'est quand même notre voisin. Et là, la question de langue est vraiment quelque chose de fondamental et peut-être le choix de Bruxelles n'a pas été complètement faux, même si les Grecs n'aiment pas trop, au moins, le symbolisme de Bruxelles. Et tu as écrit là-dessus d'ailleurs d'une manière très très critique et aussi des Allemands qui sont impliqués dans ce débat. Ladies and gentlemen, finally, because most of us speak in generally in English, the academic study of police corps is classically focused on institutional perspectives. The police as an organization, as the incarnation of the state, of the monopolization, as Weber said, of the legitimate power and violence in society. Since October 2014, Professor Laurent de Sutter has been engaged at the Käte Hamburger Center for Advanced Study in the Humanities, Law as Culture in a new critical comparative analysis of cultural concepts of police in different legal traditions through the current project provocatively entitled The Poetics of Police. So most of us don't have a poetic relationship to the police. It is very interesting how the relationship towards police can change. I remember very well the 50s and 60s where I was always very frightened when I saw a policeman in Germany, and though I was a rather brave boy, I thought this could be a dangerous encounter. And what is really one of the most surprising things in the changement, at least some changements of German society and German culture, is that when friends from abroad come to this country, they say, your police is so friendly. How are they? How did you code them? What have you done with your policemen? And police girls also, there is something incredible. So what could be an example for the fact that there is a cultural impact, not just the functional side of organizing violence and power and so forth, but there is something else, because police has also to do with communication. It is not just implementation of legal norms, but it is apparently something more. And this may be linked with civilization, with culture, and this is the great topic you have chosen. I will make just here no further comments on the topic, because you will explain it much better. To present Laurent is not necessary in this circle, because most of you know him through his interventions during our forum meetings and so forth, but perhaps some aspects should be really remembered. You have a legal training, that is rather important. You have a chair for legal theory at the Vrije Universiteit in Brussels, and you have written largely in the field of legal topics, legal questions, but you went also beyond. And this might raise your interest if I will just remind you some of the topics he addressed in his writings. And I start with the latest ones. Après la loi, after law, is the question certainly also what kind of alternatives, as one said in the 80s and 90s, but what may come after the law. Whether religion, whether other spheres of social life, etc. Then I see a dominant way to question cultural studies in his work, in a very specific way, by way of reading Zizek, by reading Deleuze, Althusser, and others, when asking where does it come from, in a broader way, that all those theorists, very much recognized all over the world, very often by way of the reception in New York and other places in the world, however, did rather ever make in the center of their interest the functioning and the structures of the law. Even for Bruno Latour, who was part of your commission for your doctoral studies, it is just one little book where he was concerned with the question of the law. But you have written about it and you have clarified, I think in a very understandable way, what is new in this approach of Bruno Latour. But in order to grasp and to seize what modern society is, those cultural philosophers did not go the way through the law, as it has been for Durkheim, for Weber, for some others, but there has also been a loss of law in the analysis of modern societies by way of sociological theory. This has been some 30, 50 years ago the topic of my habilitation. It's long ago, but it's still true. And you, in a way, not enlarging, but looking also at those actors and seeing what is their role in. And perhaps one has one day to write a kind of a conclusion about this. We can go much further in the cultural theories and cultural studies, where the law is really once again thrown out of the perspective, and to ask, what does it mean? And perhaps also for the quality of their analysis, when leaving aside one of the major features and structures of modern societies, postmodern and whatever. There is another topic that is also interesting in your writings. I have it here with me, La métaphysique de la putain. And this is interesting. It starts with the title, not that it's just about prostitutes, not prostitution, and not the problems of prostitution, or prostitution as a problem, but about the prostitutes. And not the physic of the prostitute, but the metaphysic of the prostitutes. And this makes, at least for my understanding as a philosopher, a kind of a difference. Then Althusser and Law and other wonderful writings. And you did also something, what in general I ask for my students in the first, when we first meet in the first lectures, that is to find a way to speak in a non-pornographic way about pornography. And you have written some examples of this way to look at pornography, and you're writing about porno stars, fragments d'une métaphysique du X, et d'autres écrits qui se réfèrent à l'érotisme. Et encore un livre que je trouve assez intéressant, c'est un manifeste même contre l'érotisme. Alors là, on serait très intéressé de voir un jour comment tu lis ça à tes études de droit. On va voir ça. Beaucoup de thèmes qui nous unissent, de réfléchir ensemble and to find ways to bring the law, the cultural studies, the humanities together, and this is your great project and your capacity, and this is just to give you a first hint at the very large and incredible background that is documented by a lot of books. It's an incredible list of books that he edited, that he has written, where he is editor of a series of books and so forth. It is much too long. If I start with that, you'll have no chance to make your talk. And as I know that you like to not only to talk but to communicate, now we have and we want to listen to your insights. Thank you very much for being with us, and the floor is yours.
Thank you. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you, my dear Werner, for these utterly kind words that I obviously don't deserve. I would like to reply by hopefully also utterly kind words, but that you actually do deserve, which means, well, that yes, I would like to start by acknowledging and thanking you for your marvelous hospitality here at the Käte Hamburger College Kultur. It has been, it's going to be for the next 6 months, I expect, a fantastic adventure, a fantastic moment, and I would like to thank you for getting me here in the first place. I would like to, of course, thank your crew and staff for making it so pleasant and so fulfilling, and of course all my fellow colleagues from whom I've already learned so much and from whom I hope to continue to learn a lot. This has been for all of us, I suppose, quite a wild ride or a wild journey. We have been busy with lots of things, so to focus on a project, especially a somehow ambitious project as the one I've wanted to endeavor here, has not been, is not for any of us, but has not been for me an easy task to fulfill. And I'm still not struggling, but I'm still trying to make a sense out of what I would like to do. This means that I'm still in the exploration of my corpus, I'm still in the basic exploration of the main concepts I would like to defend. So rather than presenting tonight a full overview of this project called Poetics of Police, I've decided to focus on one single case. And I've decided also to focus on one single case for let's say the reason of exposition. I mean, we are here for, I'm here to talk during 45 minutes, 1 hour. I mean, it doesn't make any sense to try to establish a full-fledged mapping of the relationship between police in general and the 10 topics that I intend to delve into in the book I'm supposed to write at the end of my journey here. Topics being namely the relationship between police and race, police and gender, police and power, police and money, police and violence, and so on and so forth. So here, rather than really give a full mapping, I will concentrate on one case, namely I will concentrate on one movie, and I will try to make you feel the type of logic I follow, or the type of process I follow in trying to make sense out of a corpus of movies for something that looks so serious as to understand what police means in different cultural contexts. I will simply start with one movie, and I will suggest some kind of a long drift with the help of this movie, so that we might, speaking of police, we have to preserve suspense, right? So that we might, at the end, arrive at some kind of a result on one very specific point. So it will be a hint, that hint at the way I work traditionally or usually when I'm working on a given topic such as the one of tonight. So I suggest that we go back to June 23, 1964, the date of the release of the second installment of the Pink Panther series, namely A Shot in the Dark, directed by Blake Edwards and featuring, as you might know, Peter Sellers as the infamous, ludicrous, ridiculous and horrible Inspector Jacques Clouseau of the French Sûreté, Elke Sommer as Maria Gambrelli, George Sanders, and many other characters that we will meet along the way. So this movie adapted from a French play. Basically, it was not so much supposed to be a cop movie or a police movie. It was adapted from a play by Marcel Achard called L'Idiote. So it was about the character of a woman that was adapted then for Broadway, and from the Broadway run it was adapted again into the movie that Blake Edwards shot. So what does the movie tell us? What's the story? What's the plot of the movie? Well, basically it's about a murder. A murder happening in the house of a very famous, very important businessman in France called Monsieur Ballon, and I do exaggerate all the French thing, because the exaggeration part in the linguistic performance of Peter Sellers is really part of the, let's say, full comedic effect. So it tells the story of a police investigation in a case of murder at the house of a very powerful French businessman, so Monsieur Ballon, played by George Sanders. So here's the opening sequence, so that you can also have a hint at the flavor, let's say the aesthetic flavor of the movie, since it will matter later in the talk. So here you have it, one of the most beautiful opening sequences. Yeah, except for this very brutal and very strange cut at the middle of the sequence. I've never understood why he wouldn't have gone for the whole, one-shot sequence. But anyway, so a murder. You have been the witnesses of the murder that occurred. Murder which is obviously discovered. And when the murder is discovered, the police send an inspector to investigate. Due to some strange mistake, the inspector that is sent to the house of this very important man is the most stupid inspector of the Sûreté, namely the Inspector Jacques Clouseau, accompanied with his assistant Hercule. When he arrives, Clouseau obviously multiplies mistakes until the moment when he is to actually interrogate the person who was found in the room where the murder was committed with a smoking gun in her hand, namely the second maid, Maria Gambrelli, played by Elke Sommer. So Clouseau proceeds to the interrogation, which actually resembles more to a flirt than to a normal interrogation, but anyway, and he's almost convinced that he's almost already in love with Maria Gambrelli, but okay, so he tries to go on with his investigation, but when he has heard that Clouseau is in charge of the case, his boss, his superior, the Commissioner Dreyfus, played by Herbert Lom, decide to take the case from him, because of course it would be a scandal if this incompetent would go on, and who knows what kind of diplomatic incident would occur in case. But a mysterious phone calls obliges Commissioner Dreyfus to put back Clouseau on the case. So he's forced to do that. Clouseau goes back on the case, and happy to be back on the case, tries to explain to his assistant Hercule what is actually the situation and what he thinks he should do. And this is the occasion of another sequence I'm going to show you. I'm not going to show you many sequences. This is only the second one. Maybe there will be a third one, but I'm not sure. So that you can see the type of, if you don't know the character, if you've never seen the movies, so that you can see or feel again what is the type of character that the aspect of Clouseau is. After that kind of class exercise that he imposes on Hercule, he goes on and he decides to release Maria Gambrelli so that he can track her and so that that she could lead him to the person that she is supposedly protecting. But unfortunately, soon after her release, another murder is committed, and Maria Gambrelli is again found standing beside the body with the weapon used to commit the murder in her hand, stained with blood. So she was arrested again, but Clouseau, once after having interrogated after another discussion, another audience with her, decides to release her again. During this period, Commissioner Dreyfus starts to feel a little bit bizarre and dizzy and nervous and irritated by the fact that his inspector is again and again releasing someone who is so obviously guilty. Finally, he decides to dismiss Clouseau again, but another phone call from somebody very high up forces him to put him again on the case. A third murder is committed in a nudist camp, where again Maria Gambrelli is found sitting next to the body of the deceased, which provokes the complete nervous breakdown of Commissioner Dreyfus. But it doesn't discourage Clouseau, who decides to devise a strategy, namely to simply take Maria Gambrelli out for a date and try to attract the killer, or to try to force her to say who she is protecting by simply trying to seduce her, something which he has wanted to do since the very beginning. So they go, they spend an evening in various restaurants and nightclubs, each time leaving beside them the body of someone killed by a mysterious killer, apparently wanting to target Clouseau, but Clouseau, of course, doesn't notice. When they go back to Clouseau's house, Clouseau's apartment, a bomb is even sent, from which he and Maria Gambrelli escape, because they were simply fighting Clouseau's Japanese servant Käte, who had been instructed by his master to attack him without warning every time he could, so that this was enhanced. I mean, it was enhanced Clouseau's, fighting skills and reflects, his quality as a policeman. So this is a failure somehow, because Maria Gambrelli is not revealing anything. So finally, Clouseau decides to devise some devilish trick. He orders all the occupants of the Ballon house to gather in the main salon and intends to confront them by creating some kind of a moment, let's say a moment of revelation, a moment where he says, will reveal the name of the guilty party, then provoking some kind of a confusion with the help of Hercule, so that actually the person who has really committed the murder would simply profit from the confusion to escape, so designating him or herself by the way. But he's so clumsy as usual that before the moment of confusion, he succeeds in making every member of the Ballon house to quarrel and to accuse each and every one of them of one of the murders that have been committed, so that at the moment when Hercule finally cuts down the light, switches off the light, everyone flees away from the salon, goes into Clouseau's car, but the problem is that Clouseau's car had been rigged by the mysterious killer, so that when they start the engine, actually the car explodes, killing every one of the persons inside of the car, so every member of the Ballon house, except Maria Gambrelli, who had stayed with Clouseau in the salon. And when Maria Gambrelli and Clouseau gets out, we hear a scream of rage, and the mysterious killer jumps at Clouseau's neck, the mysterious killer being, of course, none other than Commissioner Dreyfus, having turned completely mad by the erratic behavior of his subordinates. And so the movie ends with Käte entering the frame and jumping also on Inspector Clouseau, and all of them finishing in a fountain. So, this is indeed an absurd story. You have seen the acting, you have seen a few images, so indeed you know that we are here in the realm of comedy. So why, when one is to speak about police, why to be interested in such an absurd story? Why to be interested in such a film? Why, in more general, why should we care about what is after all mere entertainment? Why devote energy to try and get some scientific lesson out of a comedy like that? As, to put it in other words, has comedy something to teach us? To ask the question that way, to me, is actually ask the wrong question. The question formulated that way is wrongly stated. Because the question is not primarily a question of genre, or it's not primarily a question of entertainment or not. The question first concerns, I think, the very nature of knowledge. I will make it short, but you know that the very classical conception of knowledge is that it requires from us something like a hermeneutic approach, a hermeneutic look, a hermeneutic device. Images in general and films in particular would require from us that we develop or that we manifest skills in deciphering signs. A deciphering requiring as a second step some interpretative measures, of course. And to be sure, these measures can be of various types and include a very broad range of concerns, from the more general to the more contextual, from the more abstract to the more concrete. But yet, whatever these measures are, to interpret an image, to read an image, always presupposes something. That's the lesson. It presupposes this whole apparatus, this whole dispositif of reading, prescribing the use of very specific measures. So it presupposes the intellectual, cultural machinery by which science in general and visual science in particular are taken care of. But from this perspective, the only one thing that could be learned from an image or from a film is only what the grid provided by this machinery would allow us to learn, right? The rest would simply be considered as irrelevant or fall out of the grid, will simply not be perceived. We know that. I mean, it's very classic, very classical. This is very well known. But what interests me here is a corollary, is some kind of a corollary to that. There is a corollary to this very banal constatation, and it's this corollary that I'm going to try to investigate a bit. What I'm interested in here is the following facts. The whole activity of deciphering signs, the whole activity of interpretation, always leads to results that are deadly serious. Under the regime of interpretation, even the most grotesque, laughable, ridiculous scene or image becomes the object of profound concerns, deep truth, and so on. Question: is it all that a comedy such as A Shot in the Dark has to offer? Is it that by looking at a movie like that, we should draw serious insights on what police, for instance, might be? And indeed, when we express doubts on the fact that a comedy might teach us something in general, we assume the fact that the teaching, whatever it is, must have something serious about it. They can't be, so to speak, frivolous thinking, or else it's not really thinking. It can be lateral thinking, part thinking, fragmentary thinking, but not full-bodied, serious, real thinking, right? And of course, when it comes to an important topic such as police, the situation becomes even worse. Thinking about police is not, of course, a matter of joke, as we know. It's too important for that. It's too serious an affair to be taken frivolously. This is the reason why most police studies scholars have expressed and continue to express explicit contempt for the representation, that's their word, that's not mine, for the representation of police in novels, in TV series, in comic books, and of course in films. According to them, films do not treat seriously what is the reality of police. Films are one step away, to say the least, are one step away from the reality of police. Okay. But the problem is not so much a problem of adequatio rei et intellectus, right? The problem is even worse. The problem is deeper. This difference between the reality of police as an activity and its representation by cultural industries, such as Hollywood, could lead, they say, these scholars, could lead to dramatic consequences. These consequences can first concern the public, of course, but also concern the policemen, policewomen themselves. It could lead to actually delirious expectations on the side of the population on the one hand, so they say, and to, for instance, megalomaniac identification on the side of police on the other. And they insist, police simply doesn't work like that. It doesn't work like in the movies. Police differs from its representation. Here again, it's all very classical. Obviously, there can't be more platonic a reflex than the one I just described. Images are not reality, they only are second-rate simulacra, second-rate copies of reality, and so on and so forth. And police being first concerned with hard, serious realities. There is no time to lose with simulacra, above all, if they do not even try to look serious themselves. And indeed, it is true that cop movies do produce effects on both the general public and the police. Sociologists and photographers have shown that policemen and policewomen tended, for instance, to put posters of movie stars of police, movie stars playing the role of policemen in their offices, in the locker rooms, and so on and so forth. This is all very well documented, and also it's very well documented the fact that the images they choose to pinpoint are, of course, of a spectacular nature. Think, I don't know, Clint Eastwood in Dirty Harry, for instance. But for the scholars studying the everyday life of police, this fascination for spectacular figures might be misleading, as I said. Although, as they tend to outline, policemen and policewomen do not actually completely fall for it. According to the sociologists or the ethnographers, policemen and policewomen do know that there is a difference between reality and the images to which they would love to identify, but to which they know they can't. But yet, despite this knowledge, the fact remains. The fact that images and movies are not neutral. They actually parasite reality. They introduce into reality an element that wasn't there before. They produce some kind of a difference. They produce it rather than simply illustrate it, or simply being an example of it. The first elementary difference introduces, of course, the difference between their existence and inexistence, of course. But once this first difference is accepted, other differences follow. Which means that images, in terms of identification, then in terms of behavior, and so on and so forth. Which means that images do make a difference. Whatever we say, they do produce differences, they do create differences that weren't there before the images themselves appeared. Which means that images are never without consequences, as you all know. They are not the passive subject of our hermeneutical analysis. They do things, and they do things in the field of police in as much as in any other field. So if we were to use a technical term, we could even defend the following claim. Every image is poetic insofar as every image makes a difference in reality, whatever the realism of the image itself is. Images do not represent, images perform, images act, and so do, of course, moving images. So we can ask ourselves, okay, if it is so, what do the images of a shot in the dark do? Well, first of all, to remain at the very elementary level I've chosen for tonight's talk, well, they make us laugh. Or they don't, if we don't have the sense of humor that is targeted by the images we look at. They make us laugh, or not, through a singular mixture of paradoxes and, as we have seen, of some kind of an old-time classical elegance. Which means that they do something at the level of content as much as they do at the level of form. Remember, for instance, the character of Clouseau himself. He is the biggest idiot in the Sûreté. But he's not simply an idiot, right? He's mean, vindicative, self-satisfied, authoritarian, patronizing, pushed forward by ludicrous sex drives, incapable of thinking outside of the box of his desires, fantasies, obsessions, and so on. He's an idiot, and an artistic idiot at that. In short, he's indeed the worst cop one would ever think of. Yet, he is the one who finally solved all the murders having occurred throughout the movie. Obviously, he doesn't even understand that he actually has solved it. But he indeed has. And of course, there's a price for this solving. The price, which is an endless series of catastrophes, misbehaviors, casualties, deaths, accidents, destruction, all of which Clouseau is indeed fully responsible because of his stubbornness and clumsiness, right? This price, as we can see, is quite disproportionate. If to solve a case implies so big a price, is it really worth solving the case? You know? Isn't there here something like something of an unbalancing that could not be reduced? But on the other hand, we know that the features that define Clouseau and the catastrophe we have witnessed, well, they are not very serious. The disproportion, what is at stake, is not very serious. It's not very serious in every sense of the word. I mean, it's not very serious because it's comedy. It's not very serious as well because the disproportion is so enormous that nobody could take this very seriously. So it's comedy. In real life, things like that do not happen. It does not happen that way. In real life, there always is some kind of a proportion. There is some kind of an equilibrium between costs and benefits because we are reasonable human beings, aren't we? Excess is not our forte, or does it? Indeed, that's the question. And indeed, who said that disproportion, from that perspective, was not proportion? Isn't it even the most proportionate of all proportions, so to speak? Think of what is the epitome of the proportion of proportion. Let's take the golden number, which is a disproportionate, an infinite, an irrational number, which still defines the perfect or ideal proportion. So couldn't we consider the movie and its images as providing also some kind of a formal proportion, a patron, so to speak, within which this proportion could be assessed, although maybe this assessment could only be realized irrationally? Isn't Blake Edwards' supremely elegant classicism, as it was featured in the opening sequence, isn't this supremely elegant classicism a way to help us deal with the proportionality of the disproportion between cost and result in the case that we have at hand? And would it be precisely what images as form do to us? Namely, to provide an interface allowing us to actually see the disproportion, to provide a metron, a measure for us to measure the disproportion. Because, as you have seen, there indeed is there seemed to be some kind of a discrepancy or disproportion, again, between Blake Edwards' images and the story of Clouseau's adventure. And this discrepancy would be what would make so that we can realize how ridicule, how unserious is what is represented on the screen. But this reflects, I claim, this interpretation would be wrong. Actually, I would claim that it is the other way around. It is precisely because of their classical elegance that Blake Edwards' images put us in the position to understand and to feel the fact that what is shown is actually deadly serious, or at least much more serious than most of what is presented as serious. Take, for instance, George Sanders. Takes the way George Sanders in the movie, could show it to you, but take the way George Sanders actually gazes when he stares at Clouseau. It's a cold, despising gaze. It's the gaze of someone who doesn't take seriously the person he has in front of him. The gaze of someone who thinks he is superior to the living joke that Clouseau is. Someone who sees himself as belonging to some realm of exception compared to the reality with which Clouseau has to cope. To put it bluntly, George Sanders' gaze is the gaze of seriousness. It is the gaze of the order of separation between frivolous and serious. And I would say that this is what The Shot in the Dark is all about. It's about separation and the gaze. Separation between reality and its representation, we have seen that before. Between form and content, we have seen that too. Between frivolous and serious, and so on. It is about the gaze as a dispositive based on the order of separation. But again, and precisely, isn't it that every single order is about separation? Isn't ordering the action of distinguishing and then classifying what is distinguished according to some external criteria or metronome? Isn't ordering the very management of the various places whose mapping of distinction and classification have rendered necessary? Isn't ordering the very policing of those places? Isn't police the management of places according to a given order? But if it is so, things become to get a little bit confused, isn't it? And indeed, it is what Clouseau does, right? He confuses the order. And we have to take this expression in both meaning. On the one hand, he obliges the order to express its reality, the reality of the distinction and classification of places. And on the other hand, he acts on the order so that it actually makes it crumble. So that the places, and this ordering of places, is sent back to some kind of a horizontality, some kind of a equality. Ballon requires Clouseau to be back on the case, because obviously he's the one who had made full call. Dreyfus requires Clouseau to abandon the case. The hierarchy of personnel inside of the Ballon house makes so that everything is silenced, and that Gambrelli is used as some kind of a scapegoat. All these are manifestation, and very banal manifestation of order, of separation of things, of classification of things, of hierarchization of things, and so on and so forth. But precisely, it is this order that renders impossible the solving of the case. It's because there's something like an order that a case is impossible to solve, and it is because Clouseau actually confuses this order that something like the solving of the case is made possible. First, I said Clouseau obliges the order to express its reality. This reality is precisely the impossibility of the solving. It's the impossibility per se. The order is not the solution, while disorder is. It is the disordering of order that allows for the solving of the case and the punishment of the guilty parties at the same time, through some kind of poetic justice, since the car simply blows, killing everyone. So, paradoxically, it is by disordering the order, by both expressing its reality and destroying it, that Clouseau fulfills his duties as a policeman. But as we said before, wasn't policing about managing the order of places? Yes, indeed. Yes, indeed. This is not contradictory to what Clouseau does. Disordering indeed is a form of management, just as disproportion was a form of proportion. What Clouseau does is somehow, in his own peculiar way, to disorderly manage the order. And we could call that Clouseau's realism, so to speak, compared to the delirious attitude of those who are defending the seriousness of their function, like Commissioner Dreyfus, or the status, like Monsieur Ballon. Seriousness as a feature of order is what Clouseau disorders, thus managing to deal with the dimension of impossibility at its core. And it is this dimension that Commissioner Dreyfus is incapable of living with, and that finally drives him into some kind of a murder frenzy. What he wants to eradicate is precisely this dimension. He wants to eradicate the dimension of impossibility of the order, the fact that the order is actually impossible, by eradicating the agent of disorder, again, in both sense, the one who acts, who does something, like an image, and the one whose function is indeed to act, such as an agent de police, a policeman. In psychoanalytical terms, this eradication, this attempt at eradicating the agent, is what is called foreclusion, as you know. Commissioner Dreyfus actually wants to foreclose Clouseau as the agent of impossibility, that is, as the agent of the real. And for those of you who are familiar with Alenka Zupancic's work, she has recalled, in this fantastic book on comedy called The Other One In, that the real, according to Lacan, was precisely that. It was the dimension of the impossible at the core of reality. The fact that reality, in all its sound seriousness, in all its pretense at seriousness and soundness, simply is foreclosing its own impossibility. But of course, such a foreclosure, as we also know, always ends up in some outburst of psychotic violence, such as the one staged by Commissioner Dreyfus. And wouldn't this be the ultimate lesson of A Shot in the Dark? Isn't police the disordering of order, avoiding us the multiplication of psychotic outbursts by helping us to deal with the impossibility of any serious order? Isn't police the comedy of order? Isn't police the delirious and idiotic social function that ascertains that there will never be an order? Or that any pretense at a seriously grounded order is doomed to fail pathetically? Maybe these questions are some of the lessons we can draw from a close looking at A Shot in the Dark. But what we can learn not by interpreting it, but by laughing with it, so to speak. Because I would like to claim that what I've tried in front of you tonight is not really an interpretation. To some extent, it's only some kind of a joke, but of course a very serious one. Thank you very much.